The first thing Sarika did when she saw Badger was walk up to him and slap him in the face. Well, no, that's not quite accurate. She didn't walk, and it was worse than a slap. She spent at least 20 seconds hobbling across the kitchen on her pair of crutches, pausing and panting to catch her breath every couple of dragging paces, shaking all over with effort and from the lingering pain I knew she felt, but which she refused to admit out loud. She had made a very specific request on the way here in Rain's car, that we were not to help her in front of Badger, not unless she fell over and broke a bone, or literally passed out. She'd been quiet and docile in the car, but the moment she'd seen Badger through the kitchen doorway, she'd sunk deep into the murky river of her emotional waters, and dredged up that bitter scowl like the rusted hulk of a warship pulled from toxic silt. Badger had risen to his feet as she'd approached, greeting her with a hesitant smile and an amazed look in his eyes. I think until that moment he may have suspected she really was dead after all, and we may have been lying to him. But Sarika hosed him down with contempt and spite, her determination reforged into strength with every step toward him. Her eyelids kept twitching out of sync, and she struggled to stay straight on her crutches. "Sorry," he said with breathless tenderness, as she finally reached him. Over by the door, Rain and I shared a covert grimace. Preem stood prim and proper on the other side of the room, betraying nothing. I hadn't consciously predicted what was coming, but I could feel it in my gut. Evelyn had made a prediction, however, and was proven right when Sarika attempted to punch Badger in the face with the handle of her crutch. "Sorry," he was saying, "I thought you were dead." "I'm so glad you're woe." I yelped too, hand to my mouth to stifle a shocked hiccup. Sarika was much fitter and stronger than when she'd first visited us. She'd come a long way since I'd reached into the mathematics that defined who and what she was, since I'd reknitted the worst of the lingering damage left by the eye's unkind grip on her soul. She still wouldn't have made it up and down the cellar steps though, which was why this little reunion was taking place in the kitchen. I'd worked on Sarika twice in the week since then, as she'd sat in the magical workshop under Rain and Evelyn's careful supervision, and I'd held an emergency sick bucket between my knees. I'd hunted down a dozen mangled subvalues in the impossibly complex equation that was Sarika Masalkar, filled them as best I could, smoothed out the worst of her shakes, and tried to eliminate her newfound propensity for explosive migraines. It felt like repairing a cathedral with wood glue and Play-Doh. She'd regained a little of her muscle tone, and had less trouble keeping down solid food, but she was still a mess, still looked like a bruise in human form, and never seemed free of suffering except when asleep, which apparently never lasted long without either nightmares or drugs to keep them away. Her eyes were still bloodshot and ringed with dark exhaustion, and her face was still slack and pale and waxen beneath her coffee-brown skin. Her twitching was better. She'd stopped biting her own hands. I doubted I was ever going to be able to eliminate her tremors or her chronic fatigue. She was not yet fit enough to perform her penance burying the bodies of the Sherrowford cult's victims, still lying desiccated and abandoned in the empty shell of their castle, but I was learning a lot from the process of mending her shattered soul. Transferable skills for Maisie, I hoped. She also wasn't quite capable of swinging that punch, let alone with the added weight of the crutch or the awkward angle she had to adopt to stay on her feet. It was a messy, clumsy, embarrassing moment for everybody present. She flailed at his head with the handle, letting out a great heaving grunt of effort. Badger flinched and stumbled back with a yelp, getting bashed in the side with the crutch, crashing into a chair, and almost tripping over his own feet. Poor Whistle went skidding across the floor to escape the sudden outbreak of hostilities, his little doggy paws scraping the kitchen flagstones as he scurried for safety behind Evelyn's skirt. Sarika whacked at Badger another couple of times with increasing difficulty, but he was safely out of range now, gaping at her as he clutched a chair. "Can we please stop the violence?" I hiccuped again. "Please." "All right," Evelyn raised her voice. "That's enough." Rain strode forward between them, hands out like a referee separating a pair of boxers. She'd left her crutch upstairs in a show of strength, now that her leg was healed to the point she could at least pretend she didn't feel any pain. Preem didn't move, judging Badger entirely capable of recovering on his own. Or perhaps she was just unwilling to lend aid to the people who had once removed her from her body and tried to kill her mother. I sighed and stepped forward a little as well, arms out in case Sarika was about to topple over. She almost did, stamping down with her crutch again and swaying hard as she struggled to regain her balance. Back to your corners, Rain was saying in a passable imitation of a ringside announcer voice. Sarika twitched an elbow in my direction in a subconscious refusal of help. I would have rolled my eyes if I wasn't busy dealing with my own sudden pain. My phantom limbs had reached out in an effort to steady her, all of them currently mere brain ghosts, not pneumosomatic glory, but my mind still said the limbs needed support, and the bruised muscles in my flanks duly obeyed, sending a shiver of stiff pain up my sides. I was much healed since the middle of the week, but still tender and sore. The reactor organ responded too, control rods shivering for retraction, telling me to make those limbs real so I could hold Sarika steady. I resisted the urge, however oddly pleasurable. Badger shook his head, wide-eyed at Sarika. Sorry, what was that? Why? She inclined her head, doing her best to stare down her nose though Badger was taller than her. Sarika handled her spite like a gutting knife. She cut him deep with nothing but a flicker of her eyes. But Badger held her gaze. You always were a coward, Nathan, she croaked at him, voice a scratchy mess. Badger closed his gaping mouth, surprise replaced with resignation. Yeah. Yeah, I am, no lie. But not for the reasons you think. Is that it, then? Evelyn asked, with a tone as if she'd been watching a particularly disappointing variety show. Was this entire excursion an excuse to lightly abuse a condemned man? Well, I'm so glad we helped facilitate that. It's a good thing we actually have some important questions to ask the pair of you, or this would be a total waste of my time. No, Rain said slowly, looking first at Badger, then at Sarika, trying to catch her eye. No, I don't think these two are done with each other yet. Sarika snorted, then had to breathe deeply and cough to make up for the effort of snorting. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes, and screwed up my courage instead. Unless I was using brain math to rewire her nervous system, I still found her difficult to deal with. Sarika, I said. What? She croaked. Is that all you wanted? If you've said all you have to say, then we're not going to make you stay or anything. I don't like it, and I'm a little annoyed at you deceiving us, but I'll respect it. If hitting Badger is what you needed. Hey, Sarika, come on, Rain said, in a warning tone just the wrong side of gentle. It's all right, I said to Rain. Let her vent. I would waste my time to do that, yes, Sarika croaked on, voice like a handful of burnt gravel, panting between her words. It's worth the satisfaction. But right now there's a design competition on, and I am taking valuable time out of something I actually give a shit about. So yes, I do have more to say. She glared at Badger again, in a way that suggested more to say was going to be a string of creative insults like an artillery barrage aimed at his self-worth. Badger stared back, making no effort to defend himself. Design competition? Evelyn muttered. Yeah, Rain piped up with an odd smile. Forgot to mention in the car, but I saw your latest video, Sarika. Good stuff. Sarika's contempt faltered and fell beneath the hooves of battered pride. Eyelids twitching, a full body shake intensifying, she waved the dismissive hand of the terminally unable to accept praise. Whatever, it's crap. Rain shrugged. 20,000 views says otherwise. What are you talking about? Evelyn hissed. What has she been up to? Sarika, what have you been doing? Yes, I added. Did I miss something here? Rain looked at us both with surprise. Oh, yeah, she's been doing magic right under your nose and I didn't tell you, Evie. Sarcasm does not become you, Evelyn said. Rain laughed. Sarika's been making Minecraft videos on YouTube. She told us, remember? Last time she was over. They weren't listening, Sarika croaked. Morel was being sick at the time. And who cares? I care, Badger said. Shut up. Evelyn did a very long, slow blink, accompanied by a worrying tightening of her jaw muscles. Mass murderer turned Minecraft YouTuber. Fine. Forget I asked. Stranger things have happened to us, I said. It's 3 videos, Sarika wheezed. Stop making a big deal. Yeah, Rain said, but what she's not telling you is one of those videos is about one of the coolest, largest castles I've ever seen. It's got skytrains and docks and luxury bedrooms. Must have taken her days. 500 hours, give or take, Sarika said. Not like I can do much else. You'd love it, Heather, Rain said. I held my hands up in polite surrender. I'm not sure I can separate the shared responsibility for mass murder part from the cool Minecraft video part, I'm sorry. Then I added, I don't even really know how Minecraft works, anyway. That's why I said forget it, Sarika croaked. Her arms were shaking as she gripped her crutches, the effort too much to sustain as we stood around, but she refused to ask for a chair, or even to just assert dominance by sitting down first. I had to leap in before she forced her dignity all the way to collapse. Why don't you two sit down then? I asked, then hiccuped, worried this wouldn't work. If you have more to talk about, that is. Preem, would you be so kind as to make us some tea? And where's Whistle gone? Whistle, Whistle. It's okay to come out now, all the scary fighting has stopped, here boy, here. My forced domesticity did the trick. Badger made the mistake of pulling out a chair for Sarika, and Rain had to stop her from whacking him with a crutch again, but they did eventually get sat down. Sarika sat as far as possible from Badger, refused to accept any help stowing her crutches, and took out her phone to show Rain some kind of video game full of strapping young men wearing implausible outfits. Rain nodded politely, more at the various large numbers attached to Sarika's characters than the visual designs. Preem made tea, Evelyn thumped down in a chair like a professional adjudicator, and I retrieved Whistle from the floor, hugging him to my chest for some much-needed comfort. So much for not growing attached to the dog. He was too sweet. We had warned Badger about Sarika's physical state, but even softened by whatever obscure feelings he harbored for her, he still struggled with the sight of her, now that he'd gotten past the whole getting beaten with a stick part. She saw him staring too, at the way her once black hair had turned almost completely white, at her slack facial muscles and twitching eyes, at the way she labored to breathe, and how she struggled to control a constant quiver in all her misfiring muscles. Preem set tea in front of both of them. Sarika's mug cooled preemptively, and supplied with a saucer, to help mitigate the danger of her spilling any during one of her shaking episodes. Preem supplied Evelyn and Rain with tea as well, and coffee for me, and then reappeared at Evelyn's elbow with a plate of biscuits, holding them there until Evelyn huffed and accepted 2 chocolate chip cookies. After she put the biscuits on the table, Preem fussed, if fussed is the right word, for several extremely precise motions with the short blanket that Evelyn was using like a shawl, draped around her shoulders. Evelyn waved her away, but not before Preem made sure those kinked shoulders were properly warm. Well? Sarika croaked at Badger. Not so bloody pretty anymore, am I? Does your voice hurt? He asked. Yes. What, they didn't tell you I'm a mess? They did. Badger sighed and took an awkward sip from his tea. Sarika had come armored to this meeting. The previous 2 times she'd visited the house for our brain math sessions, she'd worn pajama bottoms and a comfortable old sweater beneath her long coat, with Croc shoes on her feet. But for Badger she kept the coat buttoned up, her legs inside a pair of loose jeans, and wore boots. Rain had helped her get those boots on, she couldn't have done it by herself. She could not be further from the sobbing voice I'd heard over the phone 3 days ago. The first thing Sarika had said to me when Evelyn had handed me the phone on Wednesday was, "Please don't kill him." Over the course of 10 confused and guilt-inducing minutes, she dialed that down to, "Please don't kill him yet," and finally, "Please give me time to come see him, before you do this thing." She'd stopped crying by the end of the phone call, but she had asked me not to reveal any of this to Badger. Her pride could not take it. Badger, on the other hand, looked far healthier than he had on the night I'd claimed him from Uranju. He wore clean clothes, which Rain had fetched from his tiny bedsit flat when she'd gone to rescue Whistle, just plain jeans and a t-shirt with a band logo on the front. He was still oddly greasy, no matter how much he washed, an effect I hoped would be solved when I tore up the big man's contract. His hair was forever a mop of messy brown curls falling about his eyes, the type which even a good barber's shop could only hope to hold back for a week or two. But he radiated a sort of inner peace. His pathetic hangdog vulnerability and bitter aggression had mellowed into calm acceptance. No amount of inner peace could hide the wound on his left shoulder. That was where he'd bitten himself the first time he'd summoned Uranjua's mouth into his own palm. Preen had arranged and applied a fresh dressing to the week's-old bite wound, and changed it every day this week, but the wound constantly weeped thin blood and yellow pus, soaking through the gauze and bandage within 12 hours. It refused to close or stop bleeding. Evelyn directed Preem in trying a few basic first aid techniques, some magical, some of which had involved rather a lot of pain for Badger, disinfecting and cleaning and binding the bite. But the wound simply would not heal. I doubted I could treat his wound the same way I'd treated Jang's. He lacked her supernatural constitution, so if I did bite out the big man's infection, Badger would probably end up with a hole the size of a fist in his arm, and we'd have to rush him to hospital. And besides, the wound wasn't the problem. He'd made a contract. I had to find it and rip it up, whatever that actually meant in the metaphors of hyperdimensional mathematics. Sorry, look, Badger started awkwardly, after Sarika had finished taking a very careful sip from her own mug of tea. I know we never saw eye to eye, like, about a lot of things. About Alexander, Sarika growled. Badger dipped his head and cleared his throat in pained acknowledgement. About a lot of things. But I'm really glad you made it out. I'm really happy you got out of that house, no matter what state you're in now. I thought you were gone. I have. Badger nodded awkwardly at me. I felt like hiding behind Whistle. They both fell silent. Evelyn sighed. However much I am just loving listening to this reunion, do we need to leave the room so you two can have your heart-to-heart? I had to try very hard not to cringe, not to give the game away. There was no way we were actually going to leave the room. This was all part of Evelyn's plan, to let the pair of them talk and see if in their emotional distress they slipped into details which might be useful to us. But that meant they had to keep talking. I, on the other hand, would have loved to flee upstairs. Please, I thought, this is so awkward. Whistle was beginning to get restless in my arms, I'd have to put him down soon. I needed something else to hide behind. No, Sarika croaked quickly. Don't leave me alone with him. He'll get weepy. It's all right, yeah, Badger agreed. I don't mind. Hold up a sec, said Rain, voice sharpening. Sarika, are you scared of being left alone with him? Is that what this is about? He's got a thing for you, hasn't he? Sarika managed to dial her odious contempt up to about an 8 out of 10. She glared at Rain. Don't you even insinuate that about him. Rain put her hands up and laughed. Right, got it. You get to call him things, but I don't. Sorry, Badger said. All I wanted to say was I'm glad you're alive. And he glanced around the room at the rest of us, then lowered his voice for Sarika. You've still got shooters out there if you need M. Shooters. Rain raised her eyebrows. You pushing your luck there? A metaphor, like, he said, hands up. I mean not everybody's dead, yet. Sarika, you still have friends. He took a deep breath. If you want to tell me I'm an idiot, go ahead. If that's all you wanted to say. I don't want that. Badger exploded, actually lost his temper, all his inner peace shattering back into a frustrated young man. My eyes went wide and I felt like I was trapped inside a terrible soap opera. Rain paused in the middle of sipping her tea, and stayed stuck like that. Evelyn closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. Preem appeared at Evelyn's shoulder again, with more biscuits and a packet of paracetamol. I never was in love with you, sorry, Badger went on. I don't even know where you got the idea from. You're my friend, you were always my friend. We made a stupid decision together and... You never liked Alexander, she croaked. You were in an abusive relationship. You were jealous. And he was never abusive to me. Badger did a mock-shock wide-eyed double-take, and gestured up and down at Sarika, at her ruined body. That was different, Sarika croaked. He sold us out. All of us, you included. He sold us out to the thing that whispers inside my head, all the time, every day. He didn't spare you from that. He sold us out to save his own skin. I don't care how good a boyfriend he was. Coward, Sarika croaked. Yeah. Badger spread his arms. Yeah, okay. Because I should have put my... He cut off and thumped his hand on the table, then took a deep breath and let his anger flow away. Should have put my foot down years ago. Evelyn caught my eye across the table. She predicted this too, an attempt to claim they'd never liked Alexander in the first place, but not quite in this form. Sarika would not let it go. You ran, Sarika croaked at Badger. I realized fresh tears were shining in her eyes. You ran when the rest of us tried to negotiate with Titidu. She screwed up her face, gasping for breath. The memory of the eye was too much, even if it didn't cause throat constriction and physical pain anymore. Sorry. Sarika, I said her name out loud, and put whistle down on the kitchen table, right in front of her. Feet off table, Preem intoned, then, take a biscuit, to Evelyn. What? Evelyn frowned at Preem. I'm fine, put that down. In a moment, I'm sorry Preem, I said. Sarika, listen to the sound of my voice. Don't need help, she panted. One quivering, shaking, pale hand reached out and awkwardly stroked Whistle's flank. The corgi made a soft whining noise and licked Sarika's fingers. She grimaced, but it seemed to do the trick. You ran, she repeated. We stayed. You left me when I needed you. Sarika said nothing. With a jerky, shaking arm, she wiped half-formed tears on her sleeve, gritting her teeth at the evidence she could still cry over this betrayal. Sorry, he went on, and shot a glance at me, if I'm still alive this time next week, I'm not letting you do anything like that ever again. Then tell me I'm not your friend anymore, he said. And I'll shut up. Badger braced, waiting for the follow-up, the real rejection, but the words never came. I had to suppress a hiccup. Sarika lowered her eyes back to her mobile phone, dismissing some alert from her questionable game full of athletic men. The tension in the kitchen dialed down via the half-conscious shared chorus of body language. Rain finally finished that swallow of tea and lowered her mug, catching my eye with exaggerated second-hand embarrassment. Evelyn looked ready to shoot somebody. Now that we've finished playing at couples therapy, Evelyn grumbled, then cut off as Preem bumped her elbow with the plate of food and painkillers. I'm fine, put that down. Eat, Preem intoned. Did you not have breakfast? I asked. Evelyn huffed. I had tea. Eat, Preem repeated. Evelyn snatched up another biscuit and took a scowling bite, chewing and swallowing before asking Preem a silent question with an irritable look, a look that said, well then? Preem withdrew again. As I was saying, Evelyn attempted a second time. Now that we have you both in one place, and Sarika is feeling healthier, we have an important question to. And it was never a stupid decision, Sarika wheezed at Badger. He was right. Alexander? Badger asked. You're still banging on about this? Evelyn rolled her eyes and let out a sound like a malfunctioning steam engine. Rain hid a smirk behind her sleeve. He was right, Sarika repeated. Everything I experienced, she squeezed the word out, eyelids involuntarily squinting. It proved that we're so small, we're nothing. Being human is a dead end. You can't fight it. The I, she spat. Or anything else from out there. We are a dead end. Badger pointed at me. His voice dropped to a hush, an almost religious awe. You haven't seen what she can do. Fixed me, Sarika grunted. Luck. I bit the inside of my lips. Please, please don't talk about this, don't talk about me in that way. My phantom limbs tried to curl up, to hide me away, like an octopus making itself into a ball. She can fight it, Badger said. She can. I can't even explain what I saw her do, sorry. She's human, look at her, she's a human being, whatever I saw her turn herself into, and she fought off something I can't even put into words. Screw the stuff Alexander did to his body, this was the real thing. It was like a manifestation. You remember those, in the early days before Alexander broke his sister's head? It was like watching an angel take form. She's the real thing, sorry, she's everything we were always looking for. Could you please not? I hissed. Yeah, dial it back there, friend, Rain said. Don't make me put you in timeout for 5 minutes. Don't be getting creepy about my girl. Badger cleared his throat and nodded awkwardly, but shot me a look that turned my stomach. I was no messiah, I did not want that awe. She can't fight it, Sarika croaked. All you can do is refuse to engage. The only way to win is to not make contact, because the moment you do, it's already won. You and everyone else who survived that house, you're a vector. Should take all of you, and Sarika raised 2 shaking fingers to the side of her own head, thumb out to mime a gun, and pointed it at her own temple. And burn the bodies. Sarika, I said gently. We talked about this. You're not right, she said to me, panting with the effort of her conviction. You're not right. You shouldn't be leaving any trace of it. The only reason I haven't slit my own wrists to remove myself as another vector, is because I know I'm free of it. You should be burning us all. Burn it all, and the books. I couldn't take that look, that certainty, that iron-hard need to destroy what had hurt her, expressed as omnicidal rage. Poor little Whistle must have sensed my discomfort, because he whined softly from the table, beneath my lingering hand. I had to look away. The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool, I quoted, quietly. Winning will put any man into courage, Sarika quoted back at me. I blinked at her in surprise, and she sneered with thin satisfaction. You're not the only one who knows your Shakespeare, Morel. Don't lord it over me. I shook my head. I'm not wise. I don't have much courage. And I haven't won, not yet. She snorted and rolled her eyes. Then it worked on you, Badger said. You admitted it, you're free of the eye, it worked on you. Sarika made a face like she'd been eating lemons. She tried to fix Badger with a withering look, but her face was slack and exhausted. She looked like she needed a nap. Badger glanced at Evelyn, who now had her arms crossed, staring at the ceiling. I'm sorry about this, Miss Say, he ventured. Sorry we're taking so long. No, Evelyn sighed. You are about to give your life for the cause. She made that sound very cynical indeed. The least we can do is let you go without any regrets. Say whatever you have to say. It's not as if I could do anything else with you two both in here. But Sarika spoke first. You're really going through with this, Nathan. You're going to let her rummage in your brain. Yeah, he said instantly. You did. She didn't give me a choice. And it wasn't my brain. Badger shook his head. It's not just about me. If this works, if I'm alive this time next week, I'm gonna go find the others. I'm gonna tell them there's a way out. It's not unbeatable, sorry. You're living proof of that. We'd briefly discussed his desire to help the other remnants of the cult, all of them desperate to escape the eye, earlier this morning before Rain and I had gone to fetch Sarika. I'd alluded to it previously, when I'd convinced Badger to agree to the vivisection, but I'd been trying not to think about it. This wasn't just about him. Sarika didn't say anything for a long time. Evelyn even looked like she was about to interrupt, but then Sarika looked down at the table. I saw her throat bob as she labored for breath. "How many of us are left?" she asked. Badger glanced at Rain, then at me. He knew we wanted to know as well. 11, he said, voice gone hollow. 11. Sarika managed a slack, squinting frown. At least no, at least 25 of you left Alexander's old house that night. At least. More like 30. And 11 are left. Including me. Sarika didn't know where to look for a long moment. Eventually her eyes found her phone again. Evelyn unfolded her arms and cracked her back by rotating her neck from one side to the other. 11 members of a murderous cult, who engaged in kidnapping, child murder, and attempting to kill all of us. You're lucky there's even 2 of you left, because if it wasn't for Heather, I would have eliminated every last one of you. You all deserve life in prison. Do I make myself clear? Sarika said nothing, but Badger nodded. Then he hesitated, before saying, "You said, us, sorry." You asked, how many of us are left, he echoed her earlier words. We're not going to rebuild the cult, you idiot, she wheezed at him. What are you getting at? Maybe we build something else. Not in my city you don't, Evelyn snapped. But Badger wasn't listening to her. He wasn't listening to Sarika's objections either. He was looking up at me, with the light of a terrible awe behind his eyes. I was beginning to understand how he'd ended up in a cult. Here was a man who'd been looking for meaning his whole life. And I didn't even possess any charisma. Devious, preem-intoned, bell-clear and sing-song. Evelyn swiveled awkwardly in her chair to frown at Preem, and found the demon doll staring right back at her with those blank, milk-white eyes, expressionless and unreadable. Next to Preem, Rain raised her mug of tea in a toast. Sneaky, Preem continued. Underhanded. Ingenious. What are you on about? Evelyn hissed. She's got a point, Evie, Rain piped up. She's teasing you, I said. Evelyn shrugged at Preem, but Preem declined to explain. Because, yeah, Rain jumped in, planning to resurrect their cult, talking about it right in front of you, that's the last thing you'd expect, right? Clearly little Miss Chronic Fatigue Disorder here is gonna get back together with Mr. Bites himself in the arm, and throw a coup for control of the city. Evelyn gave her a very unimpressed look. Rain put her hands up. Hey, I'm just interpreting. She gestured at Preem. Evelyn's withering glare tripped and fell before her eyes reached Preem. She cleared her throat, looked away, and finally met Preem's silent stare with a visibly embarrassed effort. Yes, I'm paranoid, she said, but that doesn't mean there aren't people out to get me. This one tried to have me killed. She pointed at Sarika. She took you out of your body. Incapable now, Preem intoned. Crippled. Neutered. Sarika huffed a single puff of non-laugh. Preem resumed her straight-backed perfect poise. Rain shrugged in agreement. I think she just wants you to worry less, Evie, I murmured. We'll all worry less when we have fewer enemies, Evelyn grumbled, turning back to the table, to Badger and Sarika. And on that subject, now you two have quite finished, I want to know everything that you do about Edward Lilburn. I've already told you everything I've got, Badger said. I never had much contact with the old bastard. Sorry, like. I did, Sarika croaked. We all turned to regard her. She shrugged, slow and lopsided and painful. Well? Evelyn snapped. Told you most of it already. Knew him through Alexander. I can't find him for you. Yes, we're working on that ourselves, Evelyn said. I'm not interested in repeating what little you know about how to locate him, I want to know what he's like, as a person. I would like to know my enemy. Ask Lauren, Sarika croaked. Lozzie doesn't know very much, I said softly. Mostly just that he's cruel and efficient. Sarika snorted, a painful sound that ended with her having to clear her throat. She hacked and coughed and struggled to get a tissue out of her pocket, and brought up a twisted glob of mucus into it. We all waited awkwardly for her to get her breath back. Sorry, you, Badger started. No, Nate. I'm not okay. I hope you like what you're seeing, because this might be your future as well. She sneered at him, then continued once he shut his mouth. Lauren is correct. Edward is cruel, and he is efficient. He's also a sadistic old freak. Alexander was he did what he did because he believed in it, he believed in something. I never got the impression Edward believed in shit. Not even himself. Rain asked. Or money, or power. Sarika thought for a moment, running her tongue slowly over her teeth behind her closed lips. He never bragged. Never used his position to abuse any of the cult. Never took liberties. But he never justified anything. Badger nodded along. Alexander always had justifications. Sarika gave a puff of breath that was probably meant to be a snort. For everything. Rolled off his tongue. Edward didn't. Like he was an alien, studying people, studying things from outside, pulling them apart, Sarika trailed off and squeezed her eyes shut, visibly exhausted by the effort. Classic sociopath? Rain offered. Perhaps, Evelyn muttered. Maybe not. Doesn't sound like he has any problems with impulse control. This thing with the book, our book he stole, Sarika, do you think it's a trap? Or do you think he expects us to negotiate in good faith? Both. Neither, Sarika went on, eyelids heavy in a half-squinting scowl. He'll have plans for both, and he won't care which option you take as long as he gets what he wants. Do you think there would be any options he would habitually not account for? Evelyn asked. Before you answer, I do want to let you know that I don't trust you, I don't trust your answers to these questions. So tell the truth anyway, because I will analyze it. She won't lie to me, Evie, I murmured. Sarika stared at the tabletop, hazy-eyed and heavy. For a long moment I thought she was nodding off, but eventually she answered. Losing. Losing, Evelyn echoed, deadpan. He would not account for losing. Well then. Rain said with a great big smile. That's easy enough, we'll be fine. We'll just stick to winning. That's my speciality, it is, winning. I rolled my eyes and let out a big sigh, exhausted by the emotional tension of being in this kitchen with these people, having to listen to what should have remained private matters, getting to know a little about a man I did not want to know, because I was probably going to kill him. I resented being here, knowing these things, resented the ugly necessity of Evelyn's plan. Rain, I whined, folding my arms over my chest. The performative absurdity isn't helping. And Evie, you can't expect a serious answer if you tell her you don't believe her anyway, that's just silly. I had expected Evelyn to be as equally exasperated as me. But she was staring at the look in Sarika's exhausted, dark-ringed eyes, with total comprehension. Yes, Evelyn murmured. Yes, I see. He doesn't even care if he wins or loses, not in that sense, does he? Sarika half shrugged. My impression. He only cares about results. You mean he's not the sort of guy who gloats over a dying enemy? Rain asked. Seemed like a right arsehole that time we met him. And in the letter he left for us. Exactly, Evelyn muttered, still frowning at Sarika. Which means everything he's done might be in order to rile us up. Intentionally. And Sarika, you're not lying. Why? Because he should be dead, Sarika wheezed. You all should be. Maybe you'll kill him. Good. Evelyn sighed. Fair enough. I have a question as well, I spoke up, stepping back, leaving my arms folded protectively over my chest. Evelyn blinked at me in surprise. I hadn't discussed this with her earlier. Rain nodded, backing me up. Ask away, Badger said. Sarika just blinked, slow as a sleepwalker. After Alexander and I fought, I said, I know he clung to life for a few hours, long enough to make the deal with the eye. But you have no idea where the body ended up, after it went missing from Glasswick Tower. Badger pulled an apologetic face, so pathetic it made me want to sigh at him. Sarika nodded, it was something I'd already asked her, weeks ago. Do you think he could still be alive? I asked. Or in some other state that isn't life, but isn't death either. Don't, Sarika croaked, an angry hiss in her voice. Okay, I said quickly, vaguely mortified. Part 2 of the same question. Badger, when Edward Lilburn sent you to kidnap Lozzie, did he make it clear we wouldn't be able to escape by going outside? Yeah. Badger nodded. Yeah, it's the only reason we took the job. Ed's man said neither you or her would be able to slip away, like. I dunno why. Dunno how he knew. Evelyn's eyebrows climbed her forehead. He knows. He knows, I echoed. That's bad. What does this have to do with Alexander? Sarika croaked. I sighed heavily. I don't know. Hopefully nothing. God grant he stay dead. Evelyn nodded slowly at my use of a familiar phrase, with unwavering agreement. May all mages lie quiet in their graves. If only we could find his body. You seem different, Sarika croaked at me. She blinked one eye, then the other, lids painfully heavy, then turned back to the game still lit up on her phone screen, swiping left to select between several shirtless men. My stomach turned. Were my changes really that obvious? On one hand, it felt like a compliment, like an acknowledgement that others could see me for what I really was, even with my pneumosomatic changes tucked away, my abyssal truth hidden from the world. I'd come to terms with not really being fully human anymore, because I was still a person. Those are two different categories, not every person is a human. For a moment I felt warm and right, felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. My reactor organ ached to blossom with power, instinct tugging at me to manifest myself in full, just for the sheer pleasure of it. On the other hand, that urge worried me. I was still bruised and sore. I swallowed it down, like stifling a purr. Different how? I asked. Sarika shrugged. I don't know. Don't care. Are you doing this thing today? Thing. I'm sorry. I blinked at her, my hands wandering idly down to my sides where the bruises from my tentacles lay beneath my clothes. One hand pressed against my abdomen, feeling the residual heat of the reactor in my belly. This was me now, this is what I was, it's what I wanted. I suspect it's what I needed long before even my trip to the abyss. That had been a catalyst. The eye had changed me first. The vivisection, Sarika said. You gonna cut Nate's skull open today, or what? This afternoon, Evelyn answered for me. Her eyes found mine and left me no choice. I turned away, clamping my lips together. I'm ready, said Badger. Whenever you are, Miss Morel. He reached across the table, and drew Whistle into his lap. I couldn't help but notice his hands were shaking as he stroked the corgi's fur. A lump grew in my throat. You staying? Evelyn asked Sarika. Should I? Sarika wheezed. Miss Morel isn't the big guns. Badger asked. Evelyn turned to regard him with glacial slowness and an icy cold stare to freeze the blood. Look at me. Remember what I am. She is not what you should be afraid of, you vermin. Deep in my private heart, I said a silent thank you to Evelyn, with a note to hug her later. Maybe cry into her shoulder a bit too. Thank you, Evie, thank you for taking the heat off me, my big scary mage with her bitter mannerisms and venomous attitude. Maybe she understood or maybe she didn't. My best friend, my surrogate sister. Who, Evie, Rain said, wincing. I don't give a damn if she saves you from the eye, Evelyn carried on. I don't give a damn if she feeds you to a tut orange juice. All I care about is that she comes out of this unharmed and a little wiser. And gets your filth out of my city. And if you ever track any back in again, I will have you hunted down and skinned and left in a shallow grave in the woods. Do I make myself absolutely clear? Badger nodded, throat bobbing. Good, Evelyn snapped. If you survive, I managed to add, trying to play the good cop, the good girl, the merciful and gentle thing that I was not, then I'm going to make you bury bodies alongside Sarika, the ones you left in the castle. Maybe you and all the other cult remnants, maybe you can do something good. I haven't thought of what, not yet. I'm staying, Sarika announced. Sorry, Badger sighed with relief and met her eyes, but she snarled at him, an ugly sound like rubbing wet gravel down the inside of her throat. Somebody needs to give you a kick in the head when you wake up, she wheezed. Well, what are we waiting for? Get on with it. Unscrew his dome. Evie, do I seem different? Evelyn furrowed her brow into one of those exasperated frowns she always adopted before delivering some witheringly sarcastic answer to a very stupid question. She even got as far as wetting her lips and opening her mouth, but then she must have seen past the surface of my words, or perhaps she recognized the earnest need in my eyes. She relaxed her weight onto her walking stick and considered me carefully for several silent moments. It's a serious question, I explained. I'm not being silly, or rhetorical, or messing you around. Or trying to illustrate some obscure point. To you, do I seem different? Evelyn sighed. Be precise. Different compared to when? I shrugged. Compared to before Monday, I suppose. Or earlier. Or earlier this week. Evelyn turned her head to consider me from a different angle, half closing one eye in a squint, studying my expression. She wasn't an idiot, she must have known what I was really asking, so she was weighing up one of two things: either how different I had become, or how much to tell me, how much to soften the blow, how much I could take. In the months since I'd become friends with Evelyn, I'd also become intimately familiar with her scrutiny, all the different ways she looked at and examined and judged people, even those closest to her. If her mind was already chewing over a problem, especially a strategic one, then she would frown straight through the person in question while really thinking about their potential, their position as a game piece, or how they fit in with what she wanted to do next. Or how to remove them from the equation entirely. On occasion she adopted that immoral hunger which I suspect she had learnt from her mother, though I would never say that out loud. But she could be tender as well, at least in private, though that implied no less frowning intensity from her big blue eyes, so deceptively soft and welcoming when at rest, so harsh when thinking. More recently I'd noticed a new form of examination in her looks at Preem, almost gentle, certainly appreciative, often vulnerable. But this was new. Evelyn's gaze hovered halfway between analytic and gentle. That made me nervous. Or since I met you. I added, heart rate climbing, palms going clammy. Or since Evie, I know this isn't an easy balance for you. Just give it to me straight. That's why I'm not asking Rain, she never gives anything to me straight. I managed a weak laugh at my own stupid joke. Heather. If you know what I mean, but. Heather, shut up. I shut up. Evelyn frowned gently at me again, then frowned out of the back window, then frowned at her walking stick, then frowned over her shoulder at the half-open door back to the kitchen. Frowned at everything, in fact, a big 360 bubble of frowning, that's our Evelyn. An elemental frown in human form. No man ever steps in the same river twice, she said slowly. For it's not the same river and he's not the same man. Good thing we're not men, then. I squeezed out a terrible fake laugh, barely more than a tremor on the final word. Evelyn gave me a look. Sorry, I added. You know what I mean. You're not the only one who can quote literature at people. Of course you seem different, Heather. You're more confident. Especially compared to when I first met you. But I'm still me. Evelyn's full-on frown roared back, blasting me like a thunderclap. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. Of course you're still you. That was more like it. Most of my anxiety melted away. I let out a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding, and lit up with an involuntary smile. I almost leaned forward to give Evelyn a hug without asking permission, but caught myself at the last moment, eyes searching hers for acknowledgement and recognition. She was utterly perplexed, but huffed and nodded, opening one arm to accept the hug. I kept it soft, hands away from Evelyn's kinked spine, but I did bury my face in her shoulder for a moment, in the blanket she was using as a shawl. When we separated, she was frowning at me in a whole new way, utterly baffled. That was all you needed, she asked. For me to shout at you a bit? That's why you asked me back here? Don't tell me you're developing a masochistic streak. You treating me the same is all the proof I need, I said. I hadn't realized that. You're very consistent, Evie. Not sure how I feel about that. You're a rock, Evelyn. You really are. I'd hate to have to rely on me as a rock. You should find a better one. But Evelyn didn't really mean that. She turned to look out into the garden with a self-conscious huff, terminating the line of conversation before I could embarrass her further. Beyond the windows, the early afternoon sunlight danced across the tree leaves, drawing tiny insects out to clamber along the overgrown grass and verdant weeds and thistleheads and mossy patches. The bright day seemed so at odds with what we were preparing to do. Evelyn and I were alone in the utility room behind the kitchen, as the others bustled about in the rest of the house, getting ready for what I was increasingly thinking of as the operation, though I would not be scrubbing up, and it would not be performed in a sterile environment. Badger had eaten what might be his last meal, bangers and mash with bisto gravy, and Sarika was half asleep on the sofa in the workshop. Zheng had been staying out of the way at my request, so as not to complicate matters with Badger and Sarika, due to her justified hatred of mages, but now she was standing guard in the workshop, though had totally refused to exchange even a single word with Sarika. Rain and Preem were gathering together the last few odds and ends we would need. Lozzie was off being Lozzie somewhere upstairs, but she was to be involved as well, that was the plan. Evelyn had finished her own preparations days ago, the setup was ready to be used. But I'd stepped away from the hustle and bustle, and asked her to join me back here for a few moments. I followed Evelyn's gaze out into the garden. British springtime was in full flow for once, even here up north, drawing perennials out of their hidden winter bulbs. A yellow riot of wild daffodils had erupted along what had once been orderly flower beds, and joined by a surprising miniature cluster of bluebells beneath the shade of the tall right-hand fence, punctuated by thistles and random wildflowers and rambling weeds. I spotted a trio of butterflies beneath the tree branches, though I squinted when I realized one of them was a very distinct shade of yellow. This is because Sarika said you seem different, isn't it? Evelyn asked. Oh, well, I suppose so. When I looked back at the butterflies, there were only two. The yellow one had vanished into the sunlight. You shouldn't listen to the opinion of somebody who hates you. She may have said it just to get under your skin. Or to knock Badger's admiration of you down a peg, which is frankly creepy in the first place. That man is raring to start a new cult around you. Careful with that. If he lives. She had a point though, I said, slipping back into my anxieties. My life has changed so much, so fast, over the last how long has it been? 8 months. Give or take. 8 months. Maybe 7. It's been a whirlwind, Evie. I can't believe how much I've changed, and now I have all these extra body parts, even if they're tucked away most of the time, and I feel like I'm beginning to fray. Emotionally, I mean. It would be so good to just stop for a month, even a couple of weeks, to take stock, to slow down, to adjust. But I can't. Maisie has a deadline. 4-5 months at most. Why are you thinking about this now? Evelyn asked. Trying to justify what we're about to do. No, I've already found my justification. I sighed. I need to understand the I, as much as possible. No. If I'm going to do hyperdimensional surgery, I need to be completely comfortable with what I'm becoming. I don't need any of this on my mind. Heather, you are not a different person because you've got some extra limbs. In fact, you're more you than ever. You know how I can tell? Because you're doing this. She gestured at the utility room and the pair of us. This is what you do. It's extremely you. I suppose. That's not it, Are you afraid of losing yourself? Jumping into the abyss again? I shook my head. Not anymore. I'm anchored now. I found my anchor. Anchors, I should say. I won't sink down there by accident, I think I may even be able to sip from it. Metaphorically speaking. Oh, I'm sorry, Evie, this is all metaphors. What were you resisting? Evelyn frowned at me in mild disbelief. Something that was already changing and which I couldn't stop. Do keep up, Heather. I'm sorry, I don't. Preem chose that exact moment to knock on the half-open door of the utility room. She pushed it wide enough to step over the threshold, the skirt of her maid uniform rustling against the door frame, milk-white eyes locating us with a flick. Her hands returned to clasp together in front of her. Perhaps she'd been listening. Speak of the devil, and she shall appear, Evelyn said with a wry little smile, then cleared her throat and added more seriously, to Preem, no offense, you are not a devil. Turn of phrase only, understand? Preem unclasped her hands, stuck out her index fingers, and held them either side of her forehead. Like horns. Devil, she intoned. Evelyn sighed. I put a hand over my mouth. I see, yes, I said with a smile behind my hand. Change that you were resisting. Hi, Preem. Good change, Evelyn said, adjusting her weight on her walking stick and rubbing her hip. Change that has made my life immeasurably better, in ways I never could have imagined. She cleared her throat and looked away. Don't have time for getting emotional right now. We all need clear heads for this. Is that why you're here? She asked Preem. All is ready, Preem said, in the sing-song of snowflakes and ice winds. Then go wait with the others. We'll be right there. I need to finish talking with Heather. Preem bustled back out without complaint, and pulled the door almost closed behind her. Evelyn turned back to me, but I was already babbling out my thoughts. I don't know what change I'm afraid of, I lied, trying to avoid it even though I was the one who'd wanted to get it off my chest. I want this body, this pneumosomatic truth, everything I've become, but maybe I'll change too far, another lie. Maybe. Evelyn sighed. You're not afraid of that. I'm not. You're afraid of how far your twin might have changed. I blinked away the beginning of thin tears, wiped my eyes on my sleeve, and nodded. You know me too well, Evie. It's hardly rocket science, she grumbled. You're thinking about Badger, about what you have to do, and this is all practice for Maisie, in the end. Isn't it? I nodded, but Evelyn kept talking. And you're thinking about the state Sarika was in when we found her, beyond humanity, beyond mortality, barely a person anymore, just a memory, smeared across the surface of reality like roadkill. Evie, I said, throat thick. I please don't. And you're wondering what Maisie will be like. How much will be left of her? What will be left to save? Evelyn spoke without looking at me, staring out into the sunlight of a warm day that felt a million miles away. Her eyes did not see what she looked at. Because this has taken too long, and she has been in the eye's grip for 10 years already, far more closely than either of those idiot cultists waiting in my workshop. And none of us can even imagine what that has done to your twin. And more than being afraid we're going to be too late, or that we're going to fail, you simply do not know what you are going to discover, when we find her. Tears rolled down my cheeks now, barely held back by my scrunched eyes and my sniffing. Evie. Maisie is very likely not a human being anymore, she said, plain and straightforward. Perhaps not even a person. Evie. Evelyn turned to me, eyes hungry and intense, with a power I'd not often seen her wield. She reached out with her free hand, her maimed hand, and grabbed one of mine, awkward and clumsy and clammy too, and held on hard. But she is still your sister. She reached out to you, Heather. You still have her message on the child's t-shirt. I know you look at it every day, don't you? I nodded, blinking as my tears fell. I nodded, my tears of a very different flavor now. I took long, slow, steady breaths, and to my incredible surprise, Evelyn reached up and helped brush my hair out of my face. She wasn't very good at it, fingers clumsy, not used to touching other people, and quickly returned to her habitual position of leaning heavily on her walking stick, but I held on to her hand, until she cleared her throat. Here, she said, digging a handkerchief out of a pocket. Dry your eyes. I accepted the handkerchief and did as she suggested, already feeling much relieved. Better? Much. Thank you, Evie. Sorry, she said. Had to push you. I laughed awkwardly. Was all that just to make me cry, to get it out of my system? Partly. Evelyn frowned. But not a word of it was a lie, understand? I nodded. You feel better now, catharsis, yes. No longer all bottled up. Good. We both need clear heads for this. We do, I admitted, glancing at the door behind Evelyn, to the kitchen. Ready to cut a man's head open? She asked. I nodded and took a deep breath as I folded the handkerchief back up. Metaphorically. Ready as I'll ever be. Will I feel anything? Badger asked. When you begin. He was trying to conceal the shudder in his voice, bravado in front of Sarika, or resolve in front of me, or perhaps a forced acceptance that he deserved his fate, but he wasn't doing a very good job of that. His voice shook, despite his best efforts to steady his breathing. Rain had just removed Whistle from his lap, at Evelyn's instruction of, no dogs allowed in the circles, and Badger had nothing else to do with his quivering hands. He'd hugged the corgi one last time, handed him off to Rain, and Whistle now sat placid but alert in Sarika's lap instead, on the sofa, another member of the audience for our operating theater. But Badger showed far more courage than he had a week ago. He didn't try to back out at the last moment. He didn't plead. Didn't run. Perhaps paradoxically, that made this all harder for me. If he'd screamed and begged and had to be dragged back into the circle, then at least he would have been the same coward and idiot he'd been last week, a cheap monster who tried to kidnap Lazi, unwilling to repent or pay for his sins. It seemed unfair that he'd finally developed a moral compass and located his spine, when I was about to do something that might end his life. You may feel a small prick, Rain answered for me, with a huge, shit-eating grin. She flourished the latex gloves on her hands, snapping one rubbery wrist cuff like a parody of a mad scientist. Evelyn didn't even roll her eyes. Rain had made 4 different variations on that joke in the last 20 minutes, complete with the same glove-snapping gesture and cheesy grin. I knew she was trying to take the edge off, but it wasn't helping, even if it did make Lazi giggle. You may feel the same, soon, Preem intoned at her. Rain put her hands up and shut her mouth, suppressing a smirk. Badger ignored both of them. He waited for me. I don't know, I said, my mouth gone dry. It'll probably be over too quickly for you to feel anything. One way or the other. He nodded. From behind, I saw his throat bob as he opened his mouth, but he had nothing left to say. At least I didn't have to see his face. We were gathered in the cave-like darkness of the X drawing room, the magical workshop, with the bright sunlight shut out behind thick curtains. Almost all of us were present, except for Tenny, who was upstairs, because nobody felt like making a literal child potentially watch a man die. Zheng was stalking up and down the rest of the house, in case Uranju took offense to my meddling with Badger's contract and decided to risk assaulting the house after all. Kimberly had not joined us. In fact, she had requested to be far, far away while we did this, and was currently visiting one of her friends from the Wiccan Coven. Badger and I were sat inside a pair of magic circles, though his was considerably more complex, with inward-facing collections of Latin and Sanskrit texts surrounding esoteric symbols, pointed like spikes in the throat of a deep-sea fish, to stop food escaping back up a slippery gullet. My circle at least didn't make my eyes water, but it was a triple-layered affair, a multiple buffer of protection and warning and bastion. He sat facing away from me. A small mercy. His circle was large enough for him to collapse onto his back without breaking the boundary. The two circles sat inside a larger circle, a full 5 layers of interlocking rings painted on a massive piece of white canvas, which now dominated the workshop floor. Evelyn had purchased it specifically for this working. She'd had Preen push back the table and clear up the other debris, even shunting our long-forgotten clay squid friend into a corner under a tarpaulin, to roll and slop to itself in peace. She'd spent most of the week constructing these circles, element by painstaking element, in charcoal and bull's blood and crushed seashell. It was, according to Evelyn, the most secure creation she'd ever made. A veritable star fortress of magic circles. But it all faced inward. Blunt and brutal, she'd said to me earlier. Absolutely nothing subtle about it. Ugly as hell, too, but it'll get the job done. The job? I'd asked. Protecting us. Protecting you, if something goes wrong. Because of course, this was nothing like fixing Sarika. Badger was still in the grip, no matter how remote, no matter if it was across the membrane between here and outside, no matter that I'd be interfacing with him via hyperdimensional mathematics. We had learnt, from our first brush with the eye, that no contact was safe. Evelyn herself was on standby, perched in a chair, ready with yet another magic circle, along with her scrimshawed thighbone and 3 large glass bottles full of rather grisly pieces of bull anatomy, ready for the big guns in case Uranju got shirty with us. Preen waited by her shoulder, ready for any task that might be tackled in a maid dress. Rain was there too. Of course she wouldn't leave me alone for this, though for once her speciality probably wasn't required. Instead of a knife or a gun, she'd carried in our first aid kit. She'd said, in case Badger bangs his head, and then like a magician producing an entire tractor from beneath a top hat, she'd dug out a large yellow clamshell box from the mess on the sofa, and added it to our supplies of painkillers and emergency bandages. Rain, Evelyn had said slowly, since when do we have a portable defibrillator? A defibrillator? My voice had risen about 2 octaves. Badger gulped. Rain shrugged. Since we're gonna do something that might stop some poor bugger's heart. It might do more than stop his heart, I murmured, wringing my hands. We don't have the equipment for this. Rain, the best thing you can keep to hand is your phone, to call an ambulance. Rain waggled her mobile phone at me. Way ahead of you. No, Evelyn sighed. I mean, where did you get it? Stole it from a train station. Wall-mounted, aren't they? You can just pick them up and go. Don't worry, I did it without being caught on camera, and I was even a very, very good Robin Hood and called them afterward to let them know some downright antisocial scoundrel had stolen their portable defib. Good idea, I'd said, before Evelyn could argue. Sarika had watched us with heavy-lidded, exhausted eyes, ringed with dark bags, saying nothing since she'd expended almost all her energy by arguing with Badger in the kitchen earlier. She was on the sofa, and she seemed like an old woman, weak and collapsed into herself. But when Whistle was deposited on her lap, she looped deceptively strong fingers through his dog collar. Good boy, she'd murmured, stroking him with a finger. Lozzie was here too, in the circle with me, her arms wrapped around my middle from behind, her head resting on my upper back. She was here as an emergency ripcord, to pull me out if something went wrong, to lend her powers to mine. She didn't have the ability to go rooting around editing people's mathematical definition, and she couldn't rebuild pneumosomatic flesh in anybody except me, but she'd insisted on joining all the same. Just in case, she'd whispered into my ear. "I can pull you out, the other way." I linked my fingers with hers, against my own front. Our breathing synced up. Her weight felt invisible. There was no more reason for delay. "What I mean is," I said out loud, "this might take only a split second. Hyperdimensional mathematics usually happens at the speed of thought. Though this is complex, it might take, I don't know, a second or two. Because there are multiple things to do," Evelyn said, soft but firm. I nodded, trying to focus on the plan, but trying to not yet allow my eyes to wander down to the notebook of hyperdimensional mathematics that lay in my lap. "Yes. First, I'm going to rip up the big man's contract. Flex my legs, as it were. If that hurts too much, then I might come back for a moment, to catch my breath. But if I don't need to, if I'm in full flow," what a joke, full flow. With brain math? Full flow of pain, more like. "Then I'll move straight on to finding the eye's grip, and examining how it yes." Everyone had fallen silent. In the corner of my eye, I saw Zheng had appeared in the workshop doorway, to watch or protect or just to be near me. Even Rain wasn't trying to grin anymore, but she shot me a confident nod when I met her eyes. "I'm ready," Badger said. "Any last words?" Rain asked him. "Thank you," he said, but didn't seem to know why he'd said it. "Get on with it," Sarika wheezed. "Before he says something he'll regret when he wakes up." I got on with it. With a sensation like relaxing a muscle that I'd held tense for too long, like uncurling a fist, or finally stretching out a bent knee, I eased one of the biochemical control rods out of its channel inside my trilobe reactor organ. A shudder of slow pleasure and sharp pain rolled through my core, the latter quick and gone again, the former lingering as heat in my belly, turning my muscles to butter, easing the remnants of my bruises. A shuddering gasp escaped my throat, and Lazi hugged me tighter. I slid the control rod out far enough to power one tentacle, then summoned that limb into brilliant, rainbow-strobing life with a flicker of hyperdimensional mathematics, arcing out from my left flank in a smooth, pale tube of flexible muscle. No teeth or hooks or toxins. Not yet. It felt wonderful. Even though I'd proven myself clumsy and inexpert, the sheer physical euphoria of my extra limb would have made me purr, if I was summoning it for any other purpose but this. "Ooh," Lazi murmured, eyes wide over my shoulder. Jing rumbled approval. I slid the control rod out further, enough to run 2 or 3 tentacles, but I didn't summon any more, though it took an effort of will to hold myself back. The extra power was another safety buffer. My chest felt tight, mouth dry, hands clammy as Lazi held on to them. I swallowed and nodded, mostly to myself, as I lowered my single tentacle toward the back of Badger's head, toward his curly brown hair and the scalp and skull beneath. A large enough target, and I did not fumble. He froze and stiffened as I wrapped the tentacle around his skull. His breath stopped in his throat. I didn't squeeze or grip very hard, the point was merely to make the connection. I'd done this thrice before to find a human being via hyperdimensional mathematics, once with Rain, and twice with Sarika. Rain had been miles away and the effort had almost sent me tumbling out of my body and into the abyss. On the time she wasn't trapped in the eye's grip, Sarika had been sitting across the kitchen table, and I'd damn well near passed out and bled from my eyes. Physical contact was going to make this easier. For a given definition of easier, this time, the eye was right there. Physical contact also provided rapid access to the inside of Badger's skull, in case everything went terribly wrong. I prepared a sheathed, razor-sharp band of bone, just beneath the surface of my tentacle, ready to flick out and slice through scalp at the speed of thought. "Ready?" I whispered. For a moment, Badger just panted in fear. Then he whispered too, do it. I looked down the notebook full of hyperdimensional mathematics, and plunged headfirst into the black sump at the bottom of my soul. Ripping up Uranjua's contract on Badger was surprisingly straightforward. Badger Nathan Sterling Hobbs, as I knew instantly, as I knew everything else about him, from the split second I carried out the trick of perception of defining him via hyperdimensional mathematics at close range, was no less complex than Sarika had been, no less complex than any human being. An equation like the nuclear furnace of a star's core, dense with roiling layers of overlapping meaning, jagged fractal possibilities, memories and events and physical structure like sedimentary layers, all penetrating and entering and commingling with each other, in a matrix of creation beyond any mortal mind. I saw the old scar on his leg where he'd fallen off a bike at age 9 and walked home alone to call an ambulance because his parents were out. I saw him in Sherrowford University Library as a student, poring over mathematics textbooks, hair short and clothes neat, clean of drugs for once, his eyes drawn inexorably to the very non-library book the stranger had left for him. I saw Alexander Lilburn, debating philosophy as Badger failed to counter his points, dragged deeper and deeper into negating his own beliefs. I saw Badger's girlfriend, the one the cult hadn't known about, the one Sarika still didn't know about, dying of a heroin overdose in a Manchester bedsit. Too much information. Like before. If this hadn't all happened in the instant of frozen time afforded to me by the brain math, I would have collapsed from the strain. Uranjua's contract was wrapped around Badger like a greasy layer of filth, a thin membrane sack of cloying, infectious claim on everything inside. Like a reverse wound. I ripped it apart, slicing through the tissue with barely a flicker of mathematics, a claw touch, and out came the equation that was Badger, flopping and heaving and wet with foul fluids. I let him flounder by himself, weak and mewling, as I picked up the contract and ate it, shredded it with razor teeth, melted it with acid, broke it down with specialized enzymes, rendered it into proteins, and destroyed any trace of what Uranju used for DNA or ink or a signature in blood. Then I regurgitated it onto the ground, as bile and acid and nothing else. That had been the easy one. One down, one to go. I slammed back to reality in a tidal wave of pain. Head flaring with bursts of supernovae explosion, face smeared wet with blood streaming from my nose, gut roiling and clenching in an effort to hold back a torrent of vomit. I keened through my teeth, gasping and kicking. Lozzie held on tight. The bioreactor had helped. I was still conscious and had more than enough energy to keep going. But defining a human being was still almost beyond my pain threshold. I'd had to surface before I could dive deeper again. And I surfaced to screaming chaos. Everyone was shouting. Zhang and Rain were nowhere to be seen, but I could hear Zhang growling from the kitchen or the front room. How was that possible? I'd taken a second, 2 seconds at most. Preem had Evelyn by the shoulders, to stop her from rising, and Evelyn had gone white in the face. Sarika was wide-eyed with terror, clutching her crutches. Whistle was up on his paws, barking. Badger was curled up in a ball, on his side, but still inside his magic circle. I'd tightened my tentacles' grip on his skull. He was mewling softly. Lozzie's arms tightened around my middle. Heathy, it's okay. It's okay, we can keep going, it's okay. Zhang made a sound like an angry tiger, and I think the crash which followed was the front door getting knocked off its hinges. Don't stop now, Lozzie whispered. We have to finish. Lozzie was right. The others would keep me safe, whatever we'd triggered. I blinked the blood out of my eyes as best I could, slammed the pieces of the equation back into place, and gripped the slick, black, dripping levers of reality once more. I spun hyperdimensional mathematics into a glove made of scalpels, reached into the equation that was Badger, and began to peel him apart, to find the eye's hidden tendrils embedded in his soul. Imagine you have crept into a torture chamber. You are there to rescue a prisoner, an abused wreck kept in a dark corner, weeping softly to himself. But upon raising your shaded lantern you discover the problem, you discover why he has not been able to free himself, despite the strength of his cries for help, and the current absence of the torturer. The torture machines are so complex that they demand hours of study just to comprehend their controls, and they have so pierced and invaded and ruined his body that he cannot be extracted from them without dying, not unless the rescue is performed with incredible care. To draw back the black iron would be to let forth torrents of his blood, to unscrew the bolts and rivets and turn the little nozzles would break his bones all over again, to lessen the pressure of the vice would crack his skull. You're here to understand those machines. And as a byproduct of understanding, through knowledge, you can get him out, with the minimum of damage. Except the machines don't make any sense. They rake his flesh from angles they could not possibly have reached, they have left him with wounds that should have killed him 10 times over, they dose him with drugs that should have rendered him unconscious, but every time you make an adjustment, he has to swallow a scream. And the torturer is returning. Down the steps at the front of the dungeon, from the opposite route you took, a great darkness heralds the one thing that might reveal how the machines work, the attention of the one of whom they are a part. But then the torturer will know you are here too. Imagine a dolphin caught in a net. The net is steel cable, it cannot be cut with the few hand tools you have. The dolphin is desperate, thrashing in the water, straining against the lines of the net, but the more the creature thrashes, the deeper the lines cut. They have cut so deep now, sawed through skin and flesh and into the organs, leaching bright red blood into the seawater. And you're down there in your flimsy, vulnerable diving gear. No sturdy shark cage to hide inside. Dead fish clog the water, blood clouds your vision. You keep rolling the dolphin over, but the net seems to have no end, no tears, no breaks, no weak spots or frayed cables, nothing to give you a way to begin freeing the dolphin. To get it out, you'll have to start digging into the poor creature's flesh. There is no other way. The netting is beyond your comprehension. But down in the water far below you and the dolphin, something is rising. Something that is watching the dolphin struggle. Something that cast the net in the first place, from an organ you cannot even imagine. If you wait for it to arrive, maybe you'll understand how the net works. You'll see the first principles behind the construction. You will understand. But then you will be in the Leviathan's maw too. Imagine you are hanging in space in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant, and the planet itself has somehow snared your fellow cosmonaut in tendrils of cloud and gravity, and is dragging him down into the crushing pressure. And you can do nothing, because the gases have invaded his suit and the gravity has broken his limbs. He is wrapped with invisible force and yet somehow not dead, cradled in the outer grip of something so utterly inimical to human life, which your senses cannot even process. You reach out to touch him, to anchor him, but you cannot understand how he is being pulled down. But the planet itself is turning below you, faster than any celestial body should rotate. A giant, 24 times the size of Earth, banded in ochre and red-orange and a million shades of crimson, against a backdrop of cold interstellar space. It is turning toward you and your companion, attention shifting on a scale your mind cannot endure. If you let it turn, it will see you. Both of you. But then you'll know. The relationship between Badger and the Eye wasn't like any of those things, of course. It was like all of them at once, and a million other tortured metaphors, the only way my fragile brain could process the information. And it was still a brain, no matter how abyssal I'd become. I was still so very small compared to the Eye, compared to even one tendril, one lash, one cell. This was nothing like freeing Sarika. She'd been disembodied by then, turned into pure information, and I'd been trying to ignore the Eye as much as possible, only comprehend as much as I needed to rip her from its grip. Badger still had flesh. Ripping him out would kill him. Every part of the equation that was Nathan was wrapped in counter-equations, poised negations, additions and addendums and expansions, like tentacles that had penetrated him through every pore. A violation more complete than any rape, any invasive surgery, any infection. The Eye owned everything that defined him, was wrapped tight around every part of him. And those were only the outermost of the outermost layers of the Eye's attention, the bits that were possible to understand because they were interfacing with the equation that described a human being. Lucky for me, that wasn't the point. I was here to understand. But comprehension was nearly impossible. I dared not look too closely at the eye's tendrils themselves. Each one was infinitely more complex than a person, an ever-shifting riot of impossibly complicated fractal equation that I kept firmly at the limit of my awareness, even as I tried to work on them, to understand how they operated, how they had invaded Badger so totally. With a sinking feeling I came to realize that the only reason I was safe was because they were so remote from the eye's real core, away across the membrane between here and outside. Badger had been invaded by the equivalent of the eye's subconscious attention. And I was burning up just trying to look back. Even the slightest movement of hyperdimensional mathematics was leaving Badger shredded and raw, pulling bits of him off, leaving them snagged in the eye's trillion fractal hooks or spinning off into necrosis and death. I would have had more luck trying to unwind a physical parasite from the wrinkles of his actual brain. Never mind comprehending this, even trying to reveal the junction between eye and human would kill Badger by the time I was done. And as I tried, so clumsy and bloody, to pare away the human from the outsider, I felt the eye become aware of me, in the way one becomes aware of furtive fumbling in a distant room. Panic, blind panic, the animalistic panic of knowing the predator is coming. If I lingered too long, I would be seen. But I sensed, on some level, that if the eye turned its attention fully on Badger, the connections would finally make sense. Or at least, a kind of sense, if I could bear to watch. But I could not stay here. I dived deeper, to sip from the abyss, to anchor myself on that submarine shore of barren silt and dunk my head into the deeper waters to draw strength from the dark. Maybe I could hide until the eye's attention passed over us both. Maybe I could drag Badger down here. Or maybe I could come back as something more suited for the task, and endure fleeting seconds of the eye's attention as it played over the inside of Badger's mind, and by watching him disintegrate, I would finally comprehend, I would be granted insight. The idea was seductive. Would it be murder? Halfway down to the abyss, playful hands snagged my ankles, and pulled me sideways. Calm haze settled on my mind like a warm blanket. I blinked clear eyes up at a night sky, devoid of clouds and blanketed with stars, bright as diamonds in the void. Heather. Come on, up time. We have to really seriously super-duper mega hurry. Lawsy. I sat up slowly, and found myself on a vast plain of bare gray earth. Cool night air hung still and soft around my face and head, like dusk after a hot day. No light but starlight fell on me. I felt unhurried and safe, not menaced by nocturnal predators or vulnerable and alone after dark. The gray plain stretched off forever in 3 directions, but right in front of me, perhaps miles away or perhaps only a few hundred meters, I sensed that distance was difficult to judge because the atmosphere was so thin, stood a rampart of mountains that scraped the heavens. The mountains were dark too, though I thought I could see a hint of dawn at the line of sharp summits. Up. Lawsy repeated, and grabbed my arms to pull me to my feet. Lawsy, what I was. I would question what I'm doing here, my own voice said, from off to one side, but apparently I don't have a choice. The little one didn't ask my permission. I turned and blinked at myself, at a vision of me, standing a few feet away on the gray soil. She, the other Heather, was dressed in my pink-scaled hoodie and triple-layered skirt, with blonde highlights in her hair and LED light-up shoes on her feet. 7 shades of absolutely not. Heather sighed and gave a little shrug. I had to invite Disco you too. Lawsy chirped. We have to find him quick. Super quick. Lawsy was at her absolute worst, shaky and jittery, all but vibrating on the spot as she glanced left and right across the endless plain. She was in her pastel poncho, wispy blonde hair flying everywhere, and I realized I was in the same clothes I'd been wearing back in the house for the vivisection. I murmured. Lawsy, stop. I was in the middle of the vivisection. I was doing brain math. I don't. You still are. She whirled back to me. Don't think about it too hard. We're in a dream. The dreams? Like we used to. I don't know why I'm here, Seven said. This is not my area of expertise, not at all. Please don't think about it too hard, Heathy, Lozzie went on at high speed. Yes and no. But don't think about it or it'll stop working, and if it stops working Badger will die. Die. Dead, not getting him back dead. You can't do it alone so I'm helping but I can't help like you do so it's this or nothing. But saving him isn't important. Lozzie bit her lower lip. With my emotions blunted by what I quickly recognized as dream logic, I glanced around the gray plane again. There was no sign of Badger, or anything that might stand in for him. The mountaintops seemed a touch lighter. That's bad, Seven said, my own shaking fear leaking into her version of my voice. She hiccuped softly. You made this? Lozzie? I asked. I'm making it all right now, but it already exists, but it's not a place but it is a place but only while we're here. But it's okay, we can get him and get gone before the peeper comes up. We need to be real quick. Like 5 minutes quick. I would estimate, said Seven Zasmi, that we have 4 minutes and 23 seconds of subjective time. And I will be leaving before then, believe me. That washed away some of the dream logic calm. I had a sinking suspicion about what exactly was rising on the other side of those mountains. Dawn was breaking, behind the mountains. Except those weren't really mountains, and that wasn't the sun or any other star casting the first touch of deep red illumination against the far side of those towering peaks. Waves of dirty crimson light seemed to lift from the rock around the mountaintops, like thousands of translucent ribbons fluttering slowly under invisible pressure, in a medium too thick to be normal atmosphere. I realized, with growing horror, that I was looking at streamers of superheated air. Whatever medium Lozzie had used to construct this place, this metaphor, this dream, whatever substrate or thought matter, it was not strong enough to withstand the crushing attention of the eye's observation. Even beneath the blanket of artificial calm imposed by the dreamlogic brain haze, my mouth went bone dry, my stomach clenched up hard, and my heart began to race. That was the eye, rising around the curvature of this globe, and there was no escape on this featureless gray plane of bare earth, not even a rock to hide behind. Every direction was blasted, baked, scoured clean of anything larger than a grain of rice, right to the horizon which seemed oddly close and visibly curved, as if this planetoid was too small. Last time I had confronted the eye, back when the fake Lozzie thing had whisked me away to Wonderland, I vaguely recalled throwing a rock at it. A futile gesture, certainly, but here I couldn't even do that. Dream logic formed a dam, holding back the headwaters of actual terror, keeping me from falling to my knees and curling up in a ball. But my hands shook uncontrollably, adrenaline flooded me like a tidal wave, and I almost started to hyperventilate. This wasn't Wonderland, this was a dream, but that was the eye, for real, metaphorized through whatever Lozzie had built here, and I was no longer an expression of executed hyperdimensional mathematics, thinking in ways that would allow me to slip between definition and reality in a heartbeat of real time. I was fully conscious, I was tiny, and the eye was approaching like a slow-motion shock wave from a nuclear bomb. Sevens had said 4 minutes and 23 seconds. No, I murmured, throat closing. We have to. My mind began the equation, spinning up the necessary mathematics to get us out of here, wherever or whatever here was. Dream or reality, outside or earth, I didn't care. That was the eye, and I was not staying to meet its gaze. Heather, no. No. Lozzie grabbed my hands and ripped my attention back down to her, disrupting my concentration with the urgency and panic on her elfin little face. The equation fell apart. I winced with headache pain and a sudden sharp nosebleed. Ow. Lozzie. If you go then we all go and it'll all collapse and it won't work, Lozzie rattled off at high speed. So you have to stay, okay? We can find him, we can do it. That's all well and good, little one, 7 shades of disco me said, visibly swallowing a pale echo of my own fear, but I don't see him anywhere. Lozzie bit her lip and turned left and right, wispy hair flicking out as her poncho twirled after her. He should be right here, we should be right on top of him, he. Why? I suddenly shouted in her face. I had it under control. Lozzie flinched like a struck cat, a full-body shudder angled away from me. That was one of the worst things I'd ever seen, but I was too scared and in too much panic to care right then, goaded into anger by fear and confusion. Heathy, it'll be fine, it'll be quick, very quick. 4 minutes, 2 seconds, said Sevens. I had it under control. I repeated, raving at Lozzie, crying softly now with sheer overload. Lozzie shrank back. I was diving, I was away from it, I had a plan, multiple plans. All sorts of different things I could have tried. And now we're here, and that, I glanced skyward at the mountain peaks. The red sunlight had brightened, the streamers of superheated air thickening in the upper atmosphere, the darkness burned away under an attention that imposed its own conditions. I couldn't think. Not with that approaching. I find myself in enthusiastic agreement, Seven said quickly, struggling to control the quiver in my voice. We should not be here. The only reason I haven't already left is because you, little one, she addressed Lozzie, have an absolutely fascinating play of your own, and I would very much regret letting you retire from the stage before you find your feet. 7 shades of sunlight looked absolutely absurd against the backdrop of gray earth and interstellar darkness, with the blonde highlights in my hair, that beautiful pink hoodie, and the LEDs flashing on her shoes. She'd modified the Raver Heather outfit even further, added a pair of rainbow-striped tights, a white and pink belt loose around her waist, and 3 fingerstrokes of bright yellow face paint across one cheek. She was like a bioluminescent squid in the depths of an ocean trench. She was also terrified, or at least channeling my terror. That, combined with the absurdly pretty outfit, helped snap me out of the worst of my panic. Did I really look like that when terrified? Wide-eyed and shaking, gone pale all over, sweaty and twitchy like a spooked field mouse. He was gonna die, Lozzie said, eyes wet and quivering. He volunteered. I snapped, anger not quite quenched. The whole point was that he might die. This wasn't the plan. Lozzie's quivering shock suddenly screwed up into tiny, defiant, puff-cheeked outrage. Yes, it was. I'm helping. You asked me to help and I'm helping because you're gonna let it look, but that's what it wants you to do because that's what it is and when it does. Yes. And when it looks, I'll understand, that's the point. It's a giant eyeball, that's what it does. It looks. We're running out of time, Seven said. Here. She clicked her fingers. I was absolutely certain she didn't need to click her fingers, she was just being dramatic. At least the gesture let me know that she was responsible for this. It was like switching the lights on in a dark room in the middle of the night, after you've woken up but your eyes haven't adjusted yet, and all the shapes of familiar furniture form strange terrain in the gloom, odd humps and hanging shapes which fill the imagination with ghosts. When you switch that light on, it turns out you've been navigating with a mixture of memory and shadow, a projection created more by the inside of your head than by external sense data. The room is real, in either light or darkness, but not the same. The plain, the mountains, the eyes rising attention chewing at the peaks like the shock wave of a supernova, it was all abstracted away into mathematics. So was I. For a glorious, beautiful moment almost pleasurable enough to wash away what was actually happening here I was top to bottom homo abyssus, far more extensively than I'd ever managed in reality. I was right. Completely. Instead of little Lozzie as short as me, dressed in pastel poncho and comfy layers and with her great long mass of blonde hair I was looking at a collection of shining starlight globes, like bubbles, curled into each other like conch shells. Their surfaces were oil on water but infinitely more beautiful, a riot of fractal color which revealed more layers the deeper one looked, a work of evolutionary art from an order of being even the most psychedelically inclined naturalist could not have imagined. The starlight globes were a kind of flesh, organized into a shape a little like a nautilus. A cute little protective shell cupped the rest of her, with yet more patterns across it, swirling and changing and melding, dozens of tiny eyes and a collection of miniature feelers poked out of the front, like a kitten peering from inside a box. There was something playful and fey about that shape. Something self-selected. Something joyful, even in panic. 7 Shades of Heather had been replaced by a beauty I had glimpsed once before, through the truth of abyssal senses, a creature of infinite frills in butter-soft delicacy, a grace beyond the sharpest lemon, flesh so smooth it was akin to sunlight on one's face. Next to her, Lozzie and I seemed like twisted, malformed children, ugly ducklings. Of course, I wasn't actually seeing any of this, not with my eyes, not with sight, not even with the metaphorical sight of Lozzie's dream imposition. All of this was abyssal truth, filtered into the best metaphors that the human mind could manage under the massive strain. If you must have this argument now, do it like this, it's quicker, 7 shades of sunlight said or thought, or projected, or injected into our minds. Her communication was like the singing voice of a planet. It was not words, but impulse, pure meaning, uncluttered by language. Lozzie and I were too overwhelmed. For long minutes, though time was irrelevant to this state of being, we just flailed and clung to each other. Lozzie let out a few half notes of attempted communication, but they died under the sheer intimidation, like trying to sing into a hurricane. 7 Shades of Stupendous Underestimation let out a sigh like a galaxy collapsing, and clicked her fingers again. Gray plain, dark mountains, red-hot rising sun, all back again. Lozzie and I, comfortably human-shaped once more, hugging like scared children. 7 Shades of Disco Heather rolled her eyes. Argue later, then, she snapped, imitating me at my huffing, outraged worst. Perhaps don't waste precious seconds. Don't doom yourselves to the mother of all suntans. She pointed at the line of mountains with a shaking hand. Lozzie and I glanced at each other. Lozzie shrank back slightly at the look in my eyes, and I let go of her, but I held on to one hand. We still need to get out, I said quickly. And I can go back to what I was doing, let it look at him, and it wants you to let it look at him so it can do that while you're close. Lozzie said. Not this again, 7 sighed. It's a trap. And he'll die and you won't get anything. It is turning its attention, yes, 7's agreed. And it will likely obliterate him, completely. Like Sarika. There won't be anything biological, anything physical left to examine. I don't care how good Evie thinks her circles are. Lozzie paused, sleepy-eyed yet panicked gaze flicking to 7's. Yeah, she added. I gave her the tiniest, most affectionate, yet disapproving frown. That was a retroactive justification. Lozzie, I sighed. And this way you can do it with your body, she said. With your hands and your tentacles and eyes and stuff, you can see how the eye does it for yourself and then just go. And it'll be safe to do it, I swear, I promise, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He said sorry, Heather. What? Badger, Lozzie said, voice quivering behind one sleeve, forcing herself not to look away. He came upstairs to talk to me. At night. He said sorry. For being in the cult. Nobody's ever apologized before. Not even Flowsy. I sighed, exasperated but beyond solutions right now. Lozzie, you should have said something. I thought you'd be really good at this, she said in a tiny voice. I thought he wouldn't die. I didn't think. It's the eye, Lozzie, I said. I'm not that good. I'm sorry. It's okay, little one, 7 Shades of Superior Me said in a soft voice. She gave Lozzie a quick hug, then glanced up at the mountain peaks. Lozzie clung to her, crying soft tears of confused shame. 3 minutes, 5 seconds. If we're going to find Badger, we best do it right now. Wait, I said. I still need to understand how I'm supposed to watch the eye interact with him. I don't understand, what's actually going to happen, when? I glanced up at the mountains too. When it arrives? Sevens let go of Lozzie and stepped back. Just meet its gaze, Heather. You're the only one who can. He should be right here. Lozzie said, panic in her heavy-lidded eyes. I don't get where. Without warning, 7 shades of sunlight exploded into a riot of amber and gold, a fractal expansion of ruffled butter and lemon shavings, homo abyssus Heather with Seven's mask slipping. With a motion like a jellyfish bobbing through the waves, she gathered skirts of satin-smooth pneumosomatic flesh and launched herself into the air like a kite from a slingshot, scattering loose gray dirt, puffing Lozzie and I with a blast of air like from a helicopter takeoff. She flew in a sudden, shallow arc away from us, parallel with the mountains. It was like watching a woman in an elaborate ball gown complete a low-orbit maneuver on a moon. Which, I suppose, was exactly what she was doing. At the apex of her flight, her ruffled yellow form seemed to bunch up toward one side, like a cephalopod preparing muscle groups for a burst of speed. I saw bits of me still in there in the core of the mass, LED light-up shoes trailing behind her on rainbow-clad legs. Sevens unleashed all that kinetic energy in a slam of air or force or ejected propellant, and her flight path took a 90-degree turn away from the mountains. What is she doing? I murmured, awestruck. Flooping. Lozzie chirped. Sevens completed 2 more rapid changes of direction, then let her final arc carry her further away. A single yellow ribbon-like structure flashed out behind her, like a finger beckoning to us, just before she vanished over the too close horizon. A split second later, a spray of dust and gray earth plumed up into the air. Come on. Lozzie yipped, and grabbed my hand. I'm so sorry, Heather, I'm sorry, but let's go. Right. I nodded, squeezed her hand, and picked up my feet. We ran hand in hand, feet kicking up little sprays of gray earth, Lozzie's poncho fluttering out behind her, my lungs heaving with effort. It was clumsy, stupid, and inexpert, because neither of us were very good runners, though at least Lozzie was fitter than I. To our right, the great dark range of mountains reared toward the sky, but their tips had brightened further, the light beginning to stream far above our heads in horizontal shafts of burning air. The sky itself was turning red and orange, dark and heavy, and deepest blue in the far distance. Heat haze wavered and flickered above us, and when I glanced over at the mountains themselves, the source of that noxious light was peeling flakes of ash and black sand from the rock, like a wave of physical pressure. Somehow, in a feat of compacted space and mind-bending physics, we reached Seven's landing site about 20 seconds later. This ball of rock and dirt we were on was impossible. How could it take only 20 seconds to reach the horizon? Gravity felt like it did on Earth, but it was like standing on a tiny moon. Hey! Hey hey! Lozzie was calling as we skidded to a halt. I had to bend forward and put my hands on my knees, heaving for breath as Lozzie danced from foot to foot. Sevens was folding away the shade of her true form which she'd extruded to achieve flight, wearing my appearance like a mask again, but with ruffles and tendrils and membranes of yellow butterscotch sucking back into her flesh like parasitic mollusks. Here and there, parts of that yellow brilliance had turned black, the flesh cracked and steaming, bleeding pale fluid, burned by grazing the awful light during the apex of her flight. Aw! TCH, she hissed through her teeth, like me after a paper cut or a stubbed toe, as she tenderly folded those damaged parts back inside herself. I tried not to watch, seeing a mirror copy of yourself sucking in extra parts like a slug retracting its eye stalks was a little much, even for me. Sevens, are you okay? My voice trailed off between gulps of air, as I realized why Sevens had landed. Lozzie was already dropping to her knees. She tossed her poncho over one shoulder and started to dig. Her slender, delicate fingers scrabbled at the gray, compacted earth. It was Badger. Or at least, I assumed it was him. The lump of flesh was barely recognizable as a person, let alone a specific person. A human head was sticking out of the barren plain which stretched in all directions. The owner of the head was buried up to their neck, and still alive, but probably not for much longer. Every inch of skin had been burned as if by direct exposure to the most powerful ultraviolet light possible, red and crisped, weeping and bleeding, covered in massive blisters, the hair and eyebrows and lashes seared away. His lips were open, sucking down thin, slow breaths like a whisper of distant wind. He was blind, eyes turned white, sight burned out by a previous pass of the impossible light. Lozzie raked away the loose earth around Badger's buried neck, but the ground was too hard, unyielding, and all she did was bend her nails and bloody her fingertips. Heather, help. Of course, he wasn't really buried. This was real, but interpreted through dream metaphor. The ground was the eye's unconscious grip, and we mere apes had not the strength to break it. I stared in horror at Badger's burned face, then glanced back up at the mountain peaks. Dark red light blasted over them now, the rays creeping downward through the air above our heads. The source of that light would rise above the mountains soon, and I could not bear the thought of seeing even its utmost outer rim. I hiccuped and straightened up, panic making my hands shake. Lozzie scratched in the dirt, but she was getting nowhere. "We can't do it," I murmured. I felt like I was 9 years old again. Don't make me. "We have barely a minute before that attention will start to touch the ground," Seven said, then hiccuped in perfect imitation of my fear. "Can't you?" I gestured at Badger with my eyes, at Lozzie trying to dig. "I don't know," Seven said. "I don't." Lozzie whipped around. "Please. Please. Please, we can't let him go, we can't let him die, Heather won't learn anything and he did." Sevens held up a shaking hand and I realized she'd painted her nails too, my nails, in neon pink. All right, little one. I will try, once, and then we all have to get out of here." Lozzie nodded. Sevens didn't wait for her to stand up or back away, but simply exploded into extra-human appendages again, like a squid jetting from a crevasse, so much more complex than anything I had achieved with Homo abyssus, and somehow much more alien, a whirling mass of yellow tentacles and tendrils and feelers, and limbs which hurt to look at, things that Lozzie's dream space could barely process into metaphor. I actually yelped in surprise and almost stumbled back. Seven slammed cutting claws and yellow tentacle fists into the earth around Badger's exposed head, engulfing him like an octopus preying on a crab. For one horrible moment I assumed she was going to decapitate him and save only his head, but her human face, my face scrunched up with strain. She levered herself backward, pulling on her extra-human parts like a tug of war. She reared up and slammed the ground again, and then a third time. The nuclear sunlight crept lower. I saw it touch the horizon far to our left, caressing the curvature of this globe with burning attention. The ground began to steam. Sevens whipped her extra parts back into herself again, heaving for breath. The earth around Badger was marked with scrapes and shallow divots, but none more than an inch or two deep. "I'm sorry," Sevens shook her head, cringing. "We can't," I said, starting to hyperventilate, my own eyes filling with tears. "We've lost. Lozzie, I'm sorry. Don't make me stay here. We can't just leave." Lozzie hopped to her feet, taking my hands in hers. "Heather, can't you brain math all the ground away or take him back to reality or something, or burn the ground, or delete it or—" I shook my head too. "Lozzie, this isn't real ground. If it was, then yes, I could just teleport him out with brain math, but this is the eye's grip, it's not. None of us are real. None of us were really there. This was happening, but not how our minds were processing it." Badger drew in a long, horrible wheeze down his burned throat. He exhaled a single word, barely more than a breath. I don't think Lozzie or Sevens heard. It was my name. He was praying to me. Except I wasn't a god, but I was the adopted child of one. I don't know if that convinced me to do as I did next, or if it was Lozzie's pleading, or a determination to preserve the usefulness of my volunteer test subject, or perhaps it was just simple bloody-minded defiance of the eye, of this vast uncaring intelligence which had tormented me half my life. Heather? Lozzie said, eyes as wide as they could go with her damaged extraocular muscles. She must have seen the look on my face. I let go of her hands and stepped back, turning toward Badger, planted in the earth like a seed of flesh. If this isn't real, I don't even need the bioreactor here, I murmured, mind working 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's all metaphor. And so when I blossomed with tentacles not 6, but 3 dozen, from flanks and back and shoulders, when I cut into the earth with digging claws and melted it with injected enzyme slurry, when I pumped it out with specialized siphons as liquid mud, when I jammed support braces of rapid growth bone and chitin against the outer wall of the hole I was digging, when I blasted Badger's shaking, emaciated frame with jets of antibiotic mucus, and wrapped him in spiderwebbing strong as steel, it was all metaphor. There were no bruises to suffer here, no reactor to overheat, no biological complications to get in the way. There was only the eye's attention, edging closer, the light burning the air less than 50 meters above our heads. But still, I shuddered with pleasure. The transformation was incredible, a work of art on the canvas of the mind, unconstrained by the limits of real flesh and the throbbing heat of the bioreactor in my abdomen. I could have gone further, melted into something not human at all, embraced abyssal reality, but I had to work fast. The mud turned caustic and toxic against Badger's exposed flesh, and I was trying not to damage him further. Lozzie gasped in delight, hands to her mouth. Sevens frowned, but didn't disapprove. Neither of them understood how I was doing this. In a very real way, I was made from the same stuff as the eye. It had adopted Maisie and me, and tried to make us more like itself by teaching us how to think. Malice? Probably not. I doubted it experienced anything as crude and ape-centric as malice, even in analogy. No, it had taught us how to think because it had tried, very briefly, to raise us, and had kept trying to raise me despite my departure. Distance learning. The ultimate helicopter parent. So when I dug into that earth, I was speaking the same language. The eye recognized my touch, my methods, my style. I suspect the same would have happened if I had dug with my actual hands, but speed was of the essence. As I dug and wrenched and pulled Badger out of the wound I'd made in the ground, I had the spine-creeping sensation that I was being allowed to do this. Even unconsciously, at the very limit of its distributed attention, the eye was not going to let some unfamiliar hand peel open its fingers and pry out something that belonged to it. Lozzie and Sevens were not allowed. But as I pumped the liquid mud out from around Badger, and pulled his legs from the sucking swamp I'd created, and hosed off his burning flesh before he lost all his skin, I felt like I was being allowed to win a playful tug of war. Playful, over a human soul. I was a young predator, being taught how to hunt. I finally pulled Badger free, got him swaddled in biological bandages to soak up his blood, and dumped him next to the hole, mewling and broken. I whipped all my extra, ad hoc parts back inside myself before I stumbled, sweating and panting, lightheaded from the effort, throbbing all over. He's out, I panted. Get him up, get out before. Lozzie was already on it. She wedged a shoulder beneath Badger's arm, and heaved him into a sitting position. None of his muscles seemed to work, twitching and shaking, shivering inside the cocoon I'd woven for him. Here. Lozzie held out her other hand toward me. Let's go. It's quicker when I do it, so let's go. I stared at her outstretched offer, then looked away, up at the shafts of noxious, nuclear sunlight slicing through the air overhead, rapidly descending toward our shadowed redoubt. A line of dark red sunlight steadily advanced toward us from the left, as if to drive us deeper into the shelter of the mountain's shadow. The ground steamed and popped where the light touched, burning away impurities under the pressure of pure observation. I can get out by myself, Seven said quickly, with a tremble in her voice. And I am just about to do so. But, Heather, what are you doing? Heather? Lozzie squeaked. I'm staying, I said. A few more moments. Oh no, Seven sighed. You said it yourself, I'm the only one who can meet its gaze. My voice quivered and my throat was closing up. I felt a terrible weight on my chest. I'd rarely been so afraid before. But I had to do this. That was rhetorical, she said. Sarcastic, even. Heather, you can't stand up to that, not as you are. I know I couldn't. But you're not actually me, I said. Sevens rolled her eyes my eyes and I decided yes, I did actually look that gormless. You're rationalizing. She was right, I was trying to rationalize what I was about to do. The line of burning sunlight crept ever closer. You're not actually the Eye's adopted daughter, I said. It will go differently for me, because I am. That's the point. And I only need to stay for a second or two. I need to understand how it does this, I nodded at Badger. And he's out now, I might not have another chance. Maisie is on a time limit and I may never get another chance to do this, to understand. It does this via the act of observation itself. I need to see it observe, I need to see how it sees. I hiccuped, loudly and painfully. I was shaking all over. Heather no, Lozzie whined, eyes pleading. I frowned at her, then tried to soften my expression. If I got this wrong, it might be the last time I ever saw Lozzie. I'll only be a second behind you. I promise. But Badger is free now, I spoke too hard, shaking all over, fear running into anger. Which means this is my only chance to understand. Go, go. Don't distract me, Lozzie, please. Lozzie's lower lip wobbled. Badger, wheezing for breath through blackened, blistered lips, managed to flop a hand in my direction. Blind eyes rolled in search of my voice. He struggled to fill his lungs, and hissed actual words, paper-thin and scratchy across burned vocal cords. Leave me with her, he wheezed. No point otherwise. No point to me. That almost broke my resolve. Badger was free of the Eye, sort of. All Lozzie had to do was translate him back out of this place, and he was refusing. For me. Volunteering for possible death in a dangerous experiment was one thing, but willingly laying down one's life in service of a leader's goals, when personal salvation and rescue was right there, right next to you, ready to whisk you away from danger, that was something else. I had reason to believe I could survive a moment or two of the Eye's direct attention, considering what I had become since my last brush with that penetrating, cosmic sight. But Badger would not live. He was offering himself with blind devotion, to yet another entity he had elevated to godhood in his mind. I froze up with the knowledge that if I took that step, I could never take it back. I screwed my eyes shut, and whispered, I will not be a monster when I next see my sister. Heather. Lozzie squeaked. Get him out of here. I shouted at her, but I was really shouting at myself, at my own temptations. Lozzie flinched and swallowed a squeal. Just go. I will be right behind you, Lozzie, I promise, okay? I love you, I do, and I won't leave you alone. I promise, just go, right now, before I change my mind, please, please. Lozzie vanished and took Badger with her. She was still shaking. Didn't even nod at me. The burning sunlight was barely 30 meters up now, and falling every second as its source rose on the other side of the mountain range. The high peaks were almost impossible to look at, backlit with searing fire that was somehow both white-hot and void-dark at the same time. The Eye was too much a paradox for any dream to contain. Light flooded the firmament above us with heat haze thick as steam, backed by violet and ochre and orange. The line of illumination on the ground was so close I could feel it like an open furnace. I turned to Sevens, but she was already shaking her head, wide-eyed with mirrored fear. Yes, I know, she said. We have seconds, at most. I can't stay, Heather. A life pulling strings and walking the boards does not prepare any director for a theater fire, even me. I'm not asking you to stay. I paused to hiccup. Go, so I can concentrate. I was already sprouting fresh sets of tentacles from my flanks and back, straight through my clothes like true pneumosomatic flesh, a clustered forest of new designs that out in reality would have taken hours of concentration and sweating pain, and would have earned me bruises deep enough to cause organ damage, flat spades of bone and chitin wrapped in leathery skin as shielding, thrown in front of me in overlapping layers like the petals of a flower, thick ablative fat beneath speed grown. Armor plates, shock absorbers to cushion my core like biological suspension, supercooled fluids manufactured by impossible glands, pumped into the spaces between my cells and used like insulation between layers of alternating membrane, dark protective films flickering shut over my eyes, triple layers of new eyelid to hold back the worst of the light. In reality, this would have felt glorious beyond imagination, but here in the dream, still wavering on the edge of lucidity, it wasn't real, it was metaphor for my limits. Deep in the part of my brain that still believed I would live through the next minute, I felt sort of sad about that. But it was very good practice. Though I struggled to imagine a situation out in reality where I would need any of this. I wasn't about to throw myself into a volcano anytime soon. I'll be right. Behind me, Sevens finished my sentence with a huff. No, you won't, stop lying. I can't ask anybody else to do this alongside me, I said. I don't think anybody else can. Don't say things like that. Sevens snapped at me, my own voice a screechy mess. You spend enough time teaching Evie she doesn't have to do everything alone, don't you start thinking like that too. I'm not. I need you to help the others. Out in reality. Can you do that? I think something happened out there, it was chaos. I know time isn't technically passing, but... With a spinning flourish that would have sent the real me tumbling onto my backside, 7 shades of sunlight peeled away part of herself. It came off like a membrane, a single translucent layer lifted from skin and hair and clothes alike, a yellow shimmer in the air as fine and light as spider silk, fluttering down into one hand as she completed the spin. She held it out to me, flushed with pride that I recognized only partly as my own. The membrane in her hand became a yellow cloak. A final mask, she said. For when all others are removed. 7 shades of sunlight was, for the first time I'd witnessed, failing to accurately imitate me. Alien intelligence looked out from inside my own eyes, and struggled to remain down here on the ground floor of humanity. Micro-expression changes in her confident pride were nothing like myself, but drawn from a dozen different sources, all of them authentically human, except for those eyes. It was like looking at my own body inhabited by a preternaturally experienced version of myself, a 1,000-year-old immortal slipped back into her own younger skin. I glanced at the cloak. It looked like silk. What is this, really? Take it. She tooted. You think we have time to explain? 5 seconds, Heather, and we are making like a banana, and splitting. I would never say that, I huffed, but I took the cloak. I needed all the help I could get. The fabric was warm as sun-kissed skin, light as buttercup petals, yet thick as alpaca wool, and strong as iron. Even with my body changed beyond human recognition, the cloak slipped about my shoulders without so much as a shrug, a mantle that felt like an embrace. What was this a metaphor for? Sevens hiccuped. The line of burning sunlight was less than 10 meters away, the light itself pouring down in a straight line from the mountain peaks, lowering toward my head. Behind those great jagged dark teeth, a black rim was rising, so distant and yet so large it seemed to dwarf the world. Make sure you are right behind me, Seven said. I'd never heard myself so serious. Because the whole play will fall apart without me? I laughed on the edge of hysteria, terrified out of my mind. Only the lingering dream logic haze kept me on my feet as I turned my shielding, my ablative meat, my cooling veins, my membranes and bone armor and bio-bunkering toward the mountain range, toward the eye rising beyond them. 7 shades of sunlight laughed like me, an irritating laugh like a particularly clumsy bird. No, of course not. That's the great pity, Heather. You're not the center of the universe, no matter what that thing over there thinks. She nodded at the mountains. If you die here, life goes on. People will miss you, terribly and deeply. They will hurt. Some of them will never stop hurting. But life will go on. She sniffed, crying real tears. And then she was gone too, seconds before the searing light of the eye's attention swept over the spot where she'd been standing. I turned to stare into the nuclear dawn rising over the mountains of the mind. A dark rim stood behind the peaks, infinitely distant yet close as one's own iris. It rose inch by inevitable inch, revealing bunched flesh, mountain ranges of its own, the edge of a lid larger than the universe. The lid lifted higher, and I spotted a sliver of silver sea. And then the wash of blinding red light, the shock wave that drove my braced heels into the gray soil, the burning heat already tearing through my outermost layers. A void, pouring with light, with attention, with observation. A thought hit me like a lash of cosmic energy: perception, awareness, recognition. Yes, I thought, and I see you too. Observation defines reality. We human beings and other people creatures, in our small bodies, with our crude senses, and our physical constraints, we like to think that observation is a passive act. We imagine that absorption of information does not affect the observed. This is a lie, fed to us by the limits of our perception. It is also not important. 99.999 recurring % of people will never, ever have to think about any of this. It will make no difference to their lives. Those few people who experience the strange warping of synesthesia have tasted the very edge of what this implies, but even they are still working within firmly grounded, human, mortal boundaries. All those limits go out the window when you deal with gods and monsters, from the wilds of outside or the deep dark cold of the abyss. And what greater source of observation than an intelligence which is all eyeball? The eye's observation, its attention, its awareness, poured from that tiny visible slit of silvered sea beneath the dark ridge of eyelid, hanging just above the mountain range. Observation blasted that barren gray plain in a wave of scorching heat to rival the corona of the sun, already burning through the outer layers of my new defenses. The deep red light was both void dark and yet blindingly bright, forcing me to speed grow new layers of thick ultraviolet protection over my vulnerable senses. Hurricane-force cosmic winds slammed into me like a million atomic bombs all detonated at once, grinding my heels into the gray soil, prompting me to lash myself to the ground with anchor cables of thick muscle, themselves plated with bioceramic heat armor in order to last more than a split second under the force of the eye's gaze. It saw me and it knew me. I think I was screaming. Deep inside, a buried part of me was wailing with a child's panic. I'd been forced to replay this trauma once before, months ago when the lousy thing had dragged me to Wonderland, but back then I'd been confused and in shock, and the eye had taken precious moments to focus a fraction of its attention on my physical body, sprawled in the black ash of Wonderland. But here, in Lousie's dream metaphor, the eye was fully aware, already hunting for the source of the unexplained tickle at the edge of its peripheral vision. It already knew what it was going to find, because it had recognized my touch when I'd freed Badger. A voice hissed through clenched teeth, "No, no, 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 not again, not again, not again, no, please, please, no." Nobody else was left, so it must have been me. I was a sobbing, shaking, hysterical child once again, transported back 10 years to utter incomprehension in the face of a cosmic truth I couldn't possibly understand. There are things no child should ever see, things that evolution has not programmed us to endure, for which all our responses are inadequate, counterproductive, inappropriate. Part of me was 9 years old again, and all she wanted was for this to stop. But I was more than the sum of my evolutionary history now. I was Homo abyssus. I cradled that 9-year-old Heather deep in a protective core of pneumosomatic armor and padded chitin and shock-absorbing pressurized gel. I reinforced her bones with steel in the osteocytes, pumped her lungs full of oxygen-rich gill fluid, armored her gray matter with specialized membranes, and cleaned the vomit and blood and tears from her face. I wrapped her in Seven's yellow cloak, a gift I still didn't understand. I coaxed her into facing the eye, and I showed her we could do it, we could stand here, and not be reduced to dust. So when I stared into that light with tears rolling down my cheeks, and said, it's okay, look, 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 I was only talking to myself. I had 5 or perhaps 6 seconds of subjective time before my fortress would collapse. The eye's burning attention tore through my armored plate tentacles like a blowtorch through tinfoil, reducing them to blackened stumps, then to ash, the limbs snapping off and tumbling behind me in the whipping gale. I speed grew replacements and slammed them into place in the petalwork lattice, though I couldn't keep up, forced tighter and smaller with each plugged breach. The heat boiled the supercooled fluids between my specialized protective membranes, and I ejected the ruined liquid in gouts of bubbling black, manufacturing more to pump into my cells before they cooked. My ablative fat crisped and burned, sloughing off in great slabs of ruined flesh. I sweated protective mucus, covered myself in a dense layer of light-reflecting white, and sprouted neural spines from my back, webbed with vascularized tissue to shed heat into my own meager shadow. The eye's observation chewed inexorably closer to my core, where I was still wrapped in Seven's cloak. My biology could not outpace the eye. But I didn't flee and I didn't look away. I stared back into the eye. I observed the great observer. That was the trick. There is a famous thought experiment which almost everybody has heard of these days, SCHR, Dinger's cat. I'm not a physicist, but I understand it is intended to illustrate the observer principle in quantum mechanics. Well, I only understand this because I read a book or two about it. I had to ask Twill for recommendations. She knows some of this better than I ever could. I do apologize to poor Mr. SCHR, Dinger, because I am about to torture his metaphor to fulfill a purpose he never intended. You take a cat and put it in a box. In the box is a device which will kill the cat. Poor cat. The cat murder machine is linked to a Geiger counter, and in front of the Geiger counter is a very small piece of radioactive material. If the Geiger counter detects atomic decay, then the machine triggers, and the cat is killed. If no atom decays, the machine does not trigger, and the cat lives. Until an observer opens the box to check, the cat is both alive and dead, at the same time. The position of the quantum particle is both A and B, until observed. Of course, the cat is not actually a cat, and the box is not actually a box. This is all a metaphor. At the quantum level, right down at the building blocks of reality, things do not work the same as up in our rarefied, higher strata, with our heads in the clouds of electromagnetism and gravity, obsessed with causality. But then again, everything on that gray plane was a metaphor.